Off the eastern coast of India, where the Bay of Bengal crashes against golden sand, there stands a ruin that refuses to be forgotten. It has survived invasions, centuries of neglect, the slow violence of salt air and monsoon rains. It has been buried, abandoned, and rediscovered. And even now, broken, incomplete, stripped of its greatest secrets, it still manages to steal the breath of everyone who stands before it. This is the story of the Konark Sun Temple, a monument so ambitious it bordered on madness, so sacred it drew pilgrims from across the known world, and so threatening to those who feared its power that empires tried, and failed, to erase it completely. Before we begin, if you love deep dives into history's greatest mysteries, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell. And drop a comment below. What do you think ultimately brought down the greatest sun temple ever built? We'll be reading every single response. And now, let's go back to the 13th century. The year is 1250. The kingdom of Kalinga, what we now call Odisha on India's eastern coast, is bleeding. For decades, the forces of the Delhi Sultanate had been pressing south, burning temples, razing cities, reshaping the subcontinent by sword and fire. They were relentless, organized, and they had already swallowed kingdoms far older and more powerful than Kalinga. But Kalinga had a king named Narasimhadeva I. He was young, he was ruthless, and he had just done something almost no ruler in India had managed to do. He had stopped the Sultanate's advance cold. The campaigns along the Mahanadi River, the years of brutal resistance that finally pushed the Muslim armies back north. Narasimhadeva hadn't just survived, he had won. And now he had a problem that only kings understand. How do you mark a victory this large? You could build a fort, you could mint coins, but Narasimhadeva I was thinking on a different scale entirely. He wanted something that would still be standing when every living memory of his wars had turned to dust. He wanted to build a temple, not just any temple, the largest, most ambitious structure ever dedicated to Surya, the Hindu god of the sun. A monument so vast and so perfect that the god himself would have no choice but to take notice. The site he chose was deliberate. Konark, on the coast of the Bay of Bengal, was already sacred ground. The name itself, Kona and Arka, meant corner and sun in Sanskrit. The light arrived here first, sharper and more golden than anywhere else on the coast. Construction began around 1244 AD. The numbers are staggering even by modern standards. More than 1,200 master craftsmen were brought to the site. Thousands of laborers worked for over a decade. The sandstone, condylite, a local rock with a warm reddish color, was quarried miles away and hauled by teams of men and elephants to the coast. And the vision was unlike anything ever attempted. The temple would not simply be a temple, it would be a chariot. The eternal chariot of Surya himself, rolling across the sky for the benefit of all creation. 24 colossal wheels, each 12 feet in diameter. He carved from solid stone with a precision that still mystifies modern engineers, would line the base of the structure. 7 enormous horses would be carved at the front, straining forward as if pulling the weight of the sun across the heavens. Every wheel was a functioning sundial. Positioned at precise intervals, they could track not just the hour of the day but the minutes. Craftsmen working in the 13th century, with no calculators, no digital instruments, they got it right. Every surface of the temple was covered in sculpture, deities, celestial beings, scenes of royal life and military triumph, and, famously, the erotic carvings that have puzzled, scandalized, and fascinated visitors for 700 years. These were not decoration, they were theology, the full range of human experience, offered up to a god who saw all things. Narasimhadeva I was not building a temple. He was building an argument, a declaration carved in stone, that his kingdom was real. His god was watching, and his victory was permanent. He was wrong about the last part, but that part of the story comes later, 12 years. That's how long it took, and when it was finally finished, when the last stone was set, the last sculpture chiseled, the last copper applied to the tower that rose nearly 200 feet above the coastal plain, what stood at Konark was something the world had never seen. The main tower, the Shikara, you soared above the surrounding landscape like a second sun. Sailors far out in the Bay of Bengal could see it from miles away. It functioned as a lighthouse before lighthouses as we know them existed. Portuguese navigators, charting the Indian coast in the 16th century, would mark it on their maps simply as the Black Pagoda, a landmark so prominent, so unmistakable, it guided ships the way a star guides a desert traveler. But what made Konark genuinely extraordinary wasn't its height. It was what was inside. According to historical accounts, and this is where the story becomes almost impossible to believe, at the very top of the shikara there was a stone. Not any stone, a magnet. A massive, carefully positioned magnetic rock that ancient engineers had embedded in the temple's superstructure with an almost incomprehensible precision. The purpose? To hold a massive iron statue of Surya suspended in mid-air. No wires, no supports, no visible means of connection. Just the invisible force of magnetism, arranged so precisely that the statue of the sun god appeared to float in the sacred space at the heart of his temple. Pilgrims who entered the inner sanctuary would see it and weep, not because they were superstitious, but because it was genuinely, inexplicably miraculous. A figure hanging in empty space, arms outstretched, bathed in golden light streaming through precisely oriented windows at specific hours of the day. Modern engineers have analyzed the architectural remains. The theories around the magnetic stone are not mythology. The structural evidence suggests that something significant existed at the apex of the shikara, and that when it was removed, it fundamentally destabilized the entire structure. The 24 wheels are the other miracle. Each one is a masterpiece of stone carving. Spokes, hubs, rims, all executed with a precision that modern craftsmen can replicate only with power tools. But they aren't just art. Each wheel is a working clock. The spokes cast shadows at known angles as the sun moves across the sky. A priest standing in the right position could look at the shadow of a spoke and tell you the time to within minutes. 12 wheels on the south face, 12 on the north. The entire base of the temple was, in effect, a clock synchronized with the motion of the god it was built to honor. And around the clock, the sculptures, thousands of them, who covering every surface from the base to the shikara. Gods and goddesses, soldiers, musicians, elephants, horses, lovers. The erotic carvings of Konark have attracted controversy for centuries. Scholars have proposed many explanations, but the most compelling may simply be this: the sun sees everything, every act of human life, sacred or profane. The temple did not exclude the erotic from the holy. It insisted the two were inseparable. Narasimhadeva, the first, died before the temple was fully consecrated. Some historians believe he never saw it completed. The monument outlived its maker by centuries, but the forces gathering at its edges were already in motion. For 2.5 centuries, Konark stood. 250 years of monsoons, of salt wind off the Bay of Bengal, of pilgrims arriving on foot from hundreds of miles away, and 250 years of sunrises striking those carved wheel faces and casting shadows that told the time to anyone who knew how to read them. At its height, Konark was not just a temple, it was a destination. A city had grown up around it. Merchants, innkeepers, craftsmen, holy men. The road to Konark was one of the most traveled in all of eastern India. People came because there was simply nothing else like it in the world. Nothing even close. And from the sea, the Portuguese confirmed it. The 16th century brought European ships to the Indian coast in growing numbers. They were mapping everything, and when they drew their charts of the Bay of Bengal's western coastline, they marked Konark prominently. They called it the Black Pagoda. The name came from the deep, weathered color of the sandstone, darkened by centuries of sea air. To a Portuguese sailor in the Bay of Bengal, it was the most unmistakable landmark on the entire eastern shore of India. Higher than anything else, visible from improbable distances, it saved lives. Ships that might have foundered on coastal shoals corrected course because a lookout spotted the Black Pagoda's silhouette against the horizon in time. But inside the walls of the kingdom, something was rotting. The Eastern Ganga dynasty that built Konark was weakening. Succession conflicts, military pressure from neighboring kingdoms, and the slow financial drain of maintaining a monument of this scale, all of it accumulating quietly beneath the surface. And then, at some point in the early 14th century, someone removed the magnetic stone. No one recorded who, no one recorded why. There are theories. rival priests wanting to destabilize the temple's sacred power, foreign raiders taking it for its material value, a desperate attempt at protection during conflict that simply went wrong. The historical record goes silent on this point in a way that feels almost deliberate. What we know is the consequence. With the magnetic stone gone, the forces that had held the shikara in balance were disturbed. The structure, engineered to extraordinary tolerances, was now operating outside its design parameters. Invisible cracks appeared in places no human eye could reach. The floating statue of Surya was gone. The inner sanctuary was empty, where once the god had seemed to hang suspended between heaven and earth. The priests continued their rituals. The pilgrims continued to arrive, but the clock was counting down, and the worst was still coming. The name Kalapahad means Black Mountain in Bengali. He served Sulaiman Khan Karani, the Sultan of Bengal, and in the 1560s he swept into Odisha with a force large enough to rewrite the map. He was systematic. The records make that clear. And this was not a pillaging raid. It was a campaign of religious and cultural erasure. Temple after temple, idol after idol. Kalapahad went through Odisha like fire through dry grass. Puri fell. The great Jagannath temple was stripped and desecrated. The priests barely managed to smuggle the sacred wooden deities out through hidden passages before the soldiers arrived. Then Kalapahad turned toward the coast, toward Konark. The priests at Konark had already heard what was coming. They had days, maybe a week. They made the decision that priests in every civilization have made when confronted with approaching destruction. Save what can be saved, and let the stones take the blows meant for the faith. The sacred idols were removed, wrapped, hidden, carried on foot inland along routes that avoided Kalapahad's advance. Some of these statues, historians believe, eventually reached villages where they are still worshipped today. A living connection to a temple that no longer stands intact. Then Kalapahad's forces arrived at Konark. What happened next is debated. The historical sources, fragmentary, contradictory, filtered through centuries of retelling, don't give us a clean account. What seems clear: the soldiers entered the complex. There was damage, deliberate, significant damage. Sculptures were broken, sacred spaces were violated, and at some point, whether by Kalapahad's forces and by the structural failure the damage triggered, or by some combination of both, the shikara came down. 200 feet of stone, gone. What remained was the Jagamohana, the audience hall, and the ruins of the surrounding compound. The surviving priests did something desperate, and in retrospect, brilliant. They sealed the entrances and filled the interior with sand. Tons of it, deliberately, carefully, packing every chamber from floor to ceiling. Sand doesn't burn, and sand doesn't succumb to political authority. Sand just sits, inert and patient, protecting whatever it surrounds. The Temple of Konark disappeared under vegetation, under sand, under the patient weight of time. The pilgrims stopped coming. The city that had grown around it collapsed. The road that had brought thousands of faithful across the subcontinent went quiet. A monument built to outlast time had been silenced in a season, but not destroyed. Not entirely. Something was still in there, and waiting. For more than 2 centuries, Konark was a ghost. The jungle moved in slowly, the way jungles do, patient, indifferent to what they consume. Roots wrapped around carved stone horses. Vines found purchase in the spaces between sculptures of celestial maidens frozen mid-dance. The sand the priests had packed into the Jagamohana settled with each monsoon, breathing imperceptibly beneath the vegetation. Local people knew it was there. The ruins were too vast to be entirely forgotten. But the world beyond Odisha had largely lost track of Konark. Then the British arrived. A military officer named Andrew Stirling is credited with being among the first Europeans to formally document the ruins in 1825. What he found was extraordinary and heartbreaking in equal measure. The shikara was gone. Only the lower platform and the Jagamohana remained structurally intact, mostly because of the sand filling. But scattered around the ruins, half buried in earth, and lay some of the most extraordinary stone sculptures anyone in the 19th century had ever encountered. Figures of women with expressions of heartbreaking specificity, not generic sacred art, but portraits, each face different, each posture caught in a moment of particular feeling. War elephants with their mahouts, carved so precisely that individual pieces of harness were readable in the stone. The erotic friezes that scandalized Victorian scholars and have fascinated everyone since. Excavation efforts began in earnest in the late 19th century and continued through Indian independence. Archaeologists working site by site, stone by stone, uncovering what the sand had preserved. The interior of the Jagamohana, when finally excavated, revealed a chamber that time had barely touched. Sculptures hidden from the sun and from Kalapahad's soldiers for 300 years emerged in a state of preservation that shouldn't have been possible. The artistry was intact. In 1984, UNESCO declared the Konark Sun Temple a World Heritage Site. It wasn't rescue, it was recognition. The acknowledgement, 7 centuries after it was built, that this broken, magnificent structure represented something irreplaceable in the human record. Today, the stone wheels still stand. The 7 horses still strain forward at the base of the platform. Visitors from every corner of the world stand before them and fall silent. The scale of the thing silences people, the specificity of it, and the fact that human hands, working with chisels in 1250, without power tools, without computers, produced this. No one knows what happened to the magnetic stone. No one knows exactly what the shikara looked like in its final days. Some questions the past refuses to answer. What we know is this: Narasimhadeva I wanted to build something that would outlast time. He failed, in the way all human ambitions to outlast time ultimately fail. Partially, incompletely, with magnificent fragments scattered where the whole once stood. But 750 years after the last stone was set, people are still talking about Konark, still traveling to stand before it, still trying to understand how it was done, why it was destroyed, and what it all meant. He wanted to build something the sun god would notice. Maybe he succeeded after all. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something about what we build and what we lose, subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. And leave a comment below. If you could travel back in time to see Konark in its full glory, the magnetic statue floating in midair, the shikara reaching toward the sky, the priests moving at the base of those stone wheels at dawn, would you go? We'll see you in the next one.